I think like we often feel like we move really fast, especially with agile methodologies. The customer support is costing you more than product development. There's a space to look into because customer has to be extremely motivated to actually reach out. My previous employer was Polish National Lottery, and it was a very paper-driven institution. You have to take into the account the scope of customer base that it's going to reach. There's always going to be newcomers to the problem space. So you have to make sure you have this like first grade material handy always.
Kasha, welcome to the Change Story. I'm
Hi.
really excited for your episode.
I'm Kasia Zaniewska. I work as a designer and lead researcher in Klarna. I'm the odd one out. I'm a female in tech space. I'm a social scientist among engineers, and I love qual and qualitative studies in the field of numbers and binary. And join me on this conversation of how to bring that perspective into digital transformation and software development.
Yeah, so there's a clear classification between doers and achievers, but when it comes to the organization, a lot of times people consider doing as their achievement when they talk about that. Hey, I did this, we completed this project, or we implemented this framework, and they sort of think of it as their achievement. But when I spoke with you, what I really liked about your approach is about an achiever, right? So you come from a design background,
Mhm.
you think like an EIR, entrepreneur in residence, and then you achieve what's important to the organization. So I'm really excited for the episode today.
I'm happy to be here and happy to share.
Of course. So I think let me start with the elephant in the room, right? So
Mm.
how come starting from a design process,
Mm.
now you are into organizational transformations, right? So tell me
Mhm.
a bit about your journey. How
Right.
did you start, and what drew you to design, and then what
Uh-huh.
made your change to changing organizations?
Right. So actually, my academic background is in social sciences,
Wow.
sociology, anthropology, and so on. And I've been doing user research for a long time. And at a certain point, I was moving further away from like data collection towards actionable recommendations. And design became a way to express that to stakeholders. So it's not just a description of what the customers are saying. It's
Right.
not a report that is dry, but it's a way that we can rework all those insights and turn them into solutions. So that's how my design story sort of began. And I want to clarify, I'm not a designer of UI. I'm a designer of processes, services, and using this approach to solve business problems. And at some point, I started considering all of human-computer interaction as my topic. So
Very
whenever there's
nice.
something going on in the organization that touches upon this interaction, I just insert myself in those processes and try to facilitate them.
Yeah, fantastic, and it's always a very good discussion about human computer
Mhm.
interaction because um, when so my background is about designing or maybe building products as
Mhm.
an engineer, and engineers design products in a very different way. So they take a lot of assumptions, and then the humans who are using it, who are not very technically adept, are always complaining about the product because the products are never so good. So
Mhm.
I'm always fascinated about the topic of HCI, and how is there even anyone who have solved it properly where the humans are really happy with the technology.
Mhm.
uh,
I
and
mean,
you can give your journey examples where you have tackled that problem.
I think so. What I'm faced with oftentimes is that we, as social scientists or members of the design competence, that we have some magical guidebook that just describes how human
Hmm.
behave, and you can tap into that, and we will solve your problems for you. And of course there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of like common grounds with psychology, psychology and so on, but we also have to remember how much we shape people behaviors through technology. And so all of those patterns of using interfaces, we weren't born with them,
Hmm.
we weren't socialized with them. It starts at a certain point, and we build our competence, like a media competence or technical competence, by interacting with products. So it's a conversation, right? So like whatever you put out to your customers and the competing solutions do as well, this is what shapes how people use it. And of course, I'm not saying that to mean that like we dictate it necessarily, because people use things not necessarily the way that we planned it. But I also feel like what goes underestimated when people want to break out from this perspective that you describe is that you have a say in it too, and you have to be careful about what you're teaching your user to do, because there's no backseas. Like you're not
Yeah,
gonna take back something that you already rolled out,
correct.
uh, in a sense that like you're gonna root out everything people learned from it, from their minds. So yeah, I think that's very important, the impact you have on mental models through what you present to the customer.
Absolutely. And when we are talking about this from an organizational standpoint, right? So, of
Mhm.
course, this podcast, The Change Story, is about driving change, especially in organizations, right? So, from your lens, when you
Mhm.
are designing processes, and of course, as the organizations grow, as the macro trends change, right? For example, now um, there's this huge AI wave going on, right? So AI has always been there, but the advent of LLMs has, brought in an awareness of a very different kind, right? ChatGPT has made people aware the power of what predictable technology can do or generative AI can do. So now, when you are there in your organization at Klarna or elsewhere in your past journey as well, how do you spot problems, right? So how do you spot
Mhm.
what needs your attention? How do you spot what you can do in that situation? How can you bring that change? Because there are n things that an organization, and especially large organizations. I was with Maersk before, starting up middleware. So there are tons of initiatives, tons of departments, tons of problem areas that one can work on. So how do you do that?
I think there are a number of ways that you that flag to you what's wrong with a process or a product. And well, number one is the customer support. Like when the customer support is costing you more than product development,
Hmm. Very good
iterating on
point.
it, there's a space to look into, right? Like because customer has to be extremely motivated to actually reach out. Like they try to solve it in other ways through documentation, trial and error, their friends around them, asking AI, right? Like,
Correct.
so for them to actually write you, that means something is really wrong. And I think there are so many ways to like sort of get data where you don't think you have it. Like we for example calculated Slack analytics
Hmm.
and looked into like time spent on solving products versus time spent by teams on iterating on the product that they've been
Wow.
building. And yeah, it's just like connecting the dots and like looking into how can you actually capture humans behavior. The other thing is like if you know that there's an area like a problem space that you've been solving couple of times, that means you probably have your problem defined wrong.
Hmm.
So if someone is complaining that we've been there before, like we've tried to solve it, it's hard. So that means like you have to sort of go back to the drawing board and look at the problem definition again and look on the criteria again instead of like
Hmm.
going to solution mode. What else that comes to mind? I think in terms of like prioritizing, um yeah, I mean like there's always like unobvious data on like things taking time, right? So like multi sources of data of some journey taking a
Right.
long time. And like as you said, I think it's also a mind shift within engineering to like think about designing solutions not from a standpoint of like what sort of technology talks to what
Hmm.
technology, and it's like an architectural scheme. Instead
Yeah.
of that, try to think about the experience someone is
Correct.
having what steps and phases they take on, and try looking into that. Like, do you actually know what your golden path is, and like, can you capture somehow whether they are on it, or most likely
Yeah.
not on it. Oh, I
Y-
have one more that came
Yeah.
to my mind that I
Yeah.
had when you
Go
were
ahead.
asking the question. So if you see your customers, that might be also neighboring team, not necessarily external customers, that they have a reroute and they have like some sort of alternative solution that they spun up, and
Yeah.
they are not using what you're proposing, but some like DIY reroute. I think that's like a very good signal that
Right.
what you're proposing is not really solving their problem.
Right. So you mentioned two things. One is prioritization. The second is engineers' approach to solving the problem, or engineers' approach to looking at solutions. So a lot of times when people have multiple areas to look at or multiple problems to look at, um,
Mhm.
prioritizing it is generally followed by indexing things based on effort and
Mhm.
indexing things based on impact, right? So
True.
how do you propose evaluating? Do you have a mental model? Do you have a certain way to analyze the cost of the problem and the cost of the solution? uh,
I think like if you wanna calculate impact in a way that actually will show you what the future might look like, you have to take into the account the scope
hmm,
of customer base that it's gonna reach. So either those customers need to be big fishes, so like
correct.
they need to be a very important part of the chain,
Hmm,
and like heavy user power users who are like in pivotal moments of the process, or the other part is like that you have a really big customer base. Like, how big is the customer base that you're actually touching with that solution,
right.
and how vital it is for your business.
Hmm,
And in terms of effort, I think what I've observed is like the effort is oftentimes measured in a sense of like difficulty.
hmm,
um, but I think people underestimate the hours spent on solving something.
hmm,
And yeah, we've been measuring times, sort of coming back to the user journey, right? So like, this is the actual reality of engineers, developers working on their solutions, and that's what we all get paid for, basically,
yeah.
right? Like, this is the actual metrics of
Hmm.
our time put into solutions. So I think not neglecting that is a good factor of actually being on point with your prioritization.
Right. Um, I'll cut here for a bit. You When we spoke earlier, you had also mentioned about
Mhm.
problem months instead of solution months.
Ah,
Uh,
yeah. Mhm.
yeah, so maybe
Yeah.
we can also talk about
Yeah.
that here, if that's relevant here, because I had written that in my notes.
Yeah.
I really like
Yeah.
that. So maybe that gives a sort of something new way of thinking
Right.
to the
Okay.
listener.
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit in terms of like the ways in a previous question, right? Like redefining the problem instead of like coming back to solution. But maybe we can try to connect that with the yeah. I was seeing in your facial expressions that I'm not hitting some nail that
Oh,
you have there.
is it? Is it? Sorry, I shouldn't have that expression.
No, it's like I'm a user researcher at heart, so like I
Oh,
have to pick up on things like that.
yeah. Good, good. I'm not bad at it. You are too good at it.
Okay, so let me go to that. Yep. So in my experience with the tech space, like fastness and speed is oftentimes pointed towards as like the key factor of addressing some issues. And I'm actually now figuring out if there's a this phenomena of like fast fallacy.
Hmm,
I think like we often feel like we move really fast, especially with agile methodologies and so on. But I think it's oftentimes worth reevaluating the time, not in terms of solutions, but in terms of problems. Like, how long have we been in this problem space? How long have we been trying to remove that obstacle, remove that problem and that issue?
hmm,
And that's what Double Diamond framework really underscores and puts a lot of emphasis on. if you don't nail the definition of your problem, if you don't have your brief right there, you're gonna keep on coming back to the same issues and solving the problem and putting money into solution mode instead of like leaning left and putting
Right.
the effort into design, making sure that you're actually solving the right problem
Right.
and not solving the problem the right way, which I think engineers enjoy the most.
Absolutely. What's the double diamond approach that you just mentioned? What is
Right.
that?
So there are three crucial components to it. So visually, it's just two diamonds, right, one after another. And what this visual is supposed to convey is that you go broad and then you narrow it down, and you do it twice. And you do it first in the diamond of the problem space, and then the second time in the diamond of solution or design, whatever sort of specific area you're working with. That means that the first diamond is first about like going broad and really understanding the initial issue we started on and researching it, looking into data, just like collecting as broad of a perspective as you can find. Then you sort of gather around again
Hmm.
for like going narrow and really looking into how we can cluster those results we find, all those findings, all those data points, and do we have a clearer vision of where the pain is actually in? Where are we losing money? Where is like some leaks in the process that make it inefficient? So that's the synthesis within the first diamond. And what you land on at the end of it is like a really crisp and clear definition of your problem. So,
Hmm.
and you can even compare it to the thing that initially sparked the whole project, right? And there's gonna be discrepancies because that's why you put the effort in, like so you can sort of eject yourself
Hmm.
from all your hypotheses and just verify them and look at the problem with the fresh eye. And then you have this brief, you have this problem definition, this sort of challenge for your solution, really crisp and clean, and it's gonna be like your motto for the whole development process.
Hmm.
So it's something you need to be super precise about, of like who are you solving for, what pain are you solving, and what value do you want to bring,
Hmm.
not what solution, not what sort of tech stack you want to bring, but like what's the value that you want to bring to your customers space. And that's how you enter the second diamond, so you always can get back to that claim that
Right.
you want to deliver on, and make sure you're not sidetracked. And again, you go wide and then narrow, which means first you prototype, and it can be as simple as like drawing a storyboard of what you want to happen. Like there's no wrong answers at the beginning. People just need to be creative and like visualize to share what they think
Hmm.
would solve a problem. And the more you work on those solutions and you like critique them with your teammates, the more you come to like couple of options that you get to test on this
Hmm.
prototype level. And that's where like the development starts, and you like start narrowing down how to solve the problem you voiced with the idea that you have, like what would be the tech stack for it, what would be the architecture for it, what would be the best way to go about it technically.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
This is very helpful. We'll also try to put some visual to help
Yeah.
in, along with your explanation. So
Hmm.
now, as you know, the show is about the change, and by the change we mean in 2026, about $3.5 trillion will be spent in just digital transformation across the globe, right? So many more companies would be using insights like yours to drive change in their organizations. Um, Tell me a bit about some of your experiences
Hmm.
where you were a part of such digital transformations, where the organizations that you were part of uh, had any traditional processes, maybe some paperwork. So if you can gather some of those stories, that will be really helpful. And maybe even if you didn't put the frameworks then, maybe how would you put it now to drive the change, right? To get buy-ins. Like tell us all about it.
I think there are two projects that come to mind that like really worked under the label of digital transformation. One is a business one. My previous employer was Polish National Lottery,
Hmm.
and it was a very paper driven institution.
Yeah.
Still is, probably to some extent. Shout out to all of my colleagues. I really loved working there. I One of the reasons that it was super paper bound is the regulations around lottery, and that at the end of the processes we would need to generate documents in the paper form anyway. So that was the consensus, and then the pandemic hit, and we weren't able to circulate paper between teams and directors and so on, and we had to come up with the solutions, and we had to come up with them quick. So that topic landed in an R&D space within the company, and it just got to me at a certain point that like there's someone making interviews and like gathering data, and seemed like a Kasia project. So I because I think with democratization of research and like people trying their best to talk to customers, you sometimes think it's just a conversation and like anyone can do it, and there's this like sort of a shortcut that is easy to take. Like your customer talks in features, you implement those features, and like the circle is repeating itself,
Hmm.
and you might end up with like a monstrosity of features that you're not able to sustain. And what a person like with like social sciences background like me sees in those conversation is the problem that people are trying to solve with the features that they mention, right? So you have to dig that out to actually create a
Correct.
solution that makes sense. So yeah, one of my colleagues had this extremely big Excel sheet of all the features that the different departments wanted to have in this digital transformation project, and it was just growing exponentially and was not we were not able to for sure deliver on all of that. So we basically did two things. One was running through the transcripts once again and sort of like using them as data and extracting common points, and the second thing was using a Moscow scale. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No,
For sure. Okay.
tell me about it.
Yeah, so the Moscow scale is a must, should, would, and couldn't. Yeah, I think that the last one is negative. Um, yeah, so basically you assign points with the
Hmm.
musts having the strongest points. Shoulds are lower, woulds are like a zero value, and then
Right.
the last negative have a minus value. So you're able to prioritize all of those features. And you have to have a strong stakeholders who decide on that. So there has to be someone with a business perspective assigning those points. Those cannot be made by the people who voice those needs,
Right.
right? Because obviously they're gonna rate their input the highest because it's most crucial for them. So we had those two streams of data from prioritization and like from the overlap, and that enabled us to choose where to start from. And the second thing I really liked about this process is we were working with Microsoft back then, as we were like that was our workspace, the main tool for our workspace, and the approach we had with them was this approach based on the concept of power users within the organizations. So instead of this one team or one department being the voice of change, we would pick people that would volunteer from all of the organizations. And I mean, really, fr- starting from IT and ending with like a salesperson in a regional branch somewhere who was tech savvy. So we could really have like a diverse representation and local implementation as well.
Yeah.
And that's how we spun up this like power user process to lead by example. And I
Hmm.
think that's a really fun, organic way to do it.
Wonderful. And this was with Microsoft?
Yes, that's what we
Okay.
collaborated with Microsoft there.
And this was with your time at the lottery.
Yes,
Um,
about I would say 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
yeah. Wonderful. So when you are, now you spotted the problem. Of course, it was COVID. Something had to be done.
Mhm.
Um, in an organization today, of course, um, COVID was a one-off, and
Yeah.
so a lot of organizations were forced to change their technology back then. And I hope like nothing like COVID happens again. But like now, how does the Kasha in different organizations across the world today um, take the buy-in of the problems that she thinks or he
Mm.
thinks are worthy of solving? Because organizations, I mean, maybe the leadership does not see it always what's coming
Mm.
up, right? And if they have made tons of money in a certain way, they have a sunk cost to it. They have a bias to it, right? They have conformation or survival bias to it, right? Because other approaches haven't made as much money, or maybe the new companies aren't as large, but they always have a risk of being stuck, being eaten up by that change. So now, how do you prescribe talking about buy-ins? How do you take that big project of transformation today, and do you have a mental model around that? Please
I
share
mean, I have a recent experience with Klarna. We've been dealing with a big change for the past 2 years. And I remember when I joined, it was like it was on my orbit, but it wasn't my key interest. And it was like, how do we make the bootstrap and the onboarding to the platform easier?
that.
And
For whom?
for engineers, both ours and the on the merchant side, so like
Right.
very crucial for our business. And I think what we sort of the pushback was like, yeah, but like we basically invest more in maintaining good relationships than we are in scaling. So it's like iterating on this cooperation is much more important than like
Right.
starting it off. And what was very difficult for us to voice when I like sort of joined that initiative is the effort it takes to onboarding and bootstrapping, and that if we would streamline this process, part of the iteration would become easier as well, because it would just repeat the part of the cycle, and we would also work with much more unified and standardized ways of working. So that means we would sink less into support, and we used two things to like get that point across, so it wouldn't be just a discussion. One was making the leadership suffer. So we got lucky, maybe not in a level of COVID, if you call it lucky,
Yeah.
but one of the like the leadership team really got into the Toyota methodology and the Gembas, which means going to the factory floor and actually feeling how the value is created. So we had that concept going for us. And the second thing is like we wanted to sort of put an end to this discussion, the back and forth. So we were able to agree that we will assign a half a day once a week to going through that process. And when the CTO and the domain leads really went through it and cursed and were annoyed and so on, that really like make them experience and feel it. And for them to also have data, not only the feeling, to have a sign off on that investment to like transform this process, we also calculated um, time investment it takes to do it, and we counted it in steps, so it was like over 90 steps, and we counted it um, in estimated time, because we sort of, because we own the tech stack, we were able to establish how much waiting time there is, how much doing time there is, and how long this process is. And if you equate that to FTEs, so like full-time employees, that becomes a number that like speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So there were two ways, like a very very emotional way, and a very data-driven, rational argument as well.
Right. And I think there's always another angle of, for example, if you're transforming a system or you're rewriting a system, of
Mhm.
course there is much more that you can do, and because you're saving huge amounts of money or time, but there's also a roadmap of the existing product itself, right? So
Mhm.
once you start transforming, the transformation process takes time, but you also have to shut down any new developments on the roadmap. Otherwise, you'll end up playing only catch up, right? So how do you convince the leadership of that? Because that's an opportunity cost. So now you have two things. One is the cost of operations, and the other is opportunity cost, because they don't know what you're talking about, and it's a long journey for them to believe you, like truly believe you, and not take any risk. Because as an organization gets larger, um, might be my opinion, but most of the incentives are aligned for people to not make any mistakes, right? So
Mm.
if something is working, don't touch it, kind of mentality. So how do you talk about the opportunity cost there?
Okay, so I would also want you to expand on it a little bit because I have a different take, and maybe it's a
Yes,
misunderstanding, and
good,
maybe it's yeah,
good.
or maybe it's an actual different
Yeah.
perspective. So I'm gonna get to it in a second. The one thing that I see in Klarna and I really appreciate is that we are not incentivized not to fail. Like one of the key core values in Klarna is like make your mistakes fast and early so you don't scale them, right? So
Correct.
like you're encouraged to put things maybe not in production but like push them forward as far as you can go so you can see the outcome and like
Mm,
really experiment and demo those results.
right.
So that's, I think, like a cultural principle that really helps. And it sometimes goes against even my intuition because I would probably prefer to like test things on prototypes,
Mm,
not on live and like and so on, right? But like the tech mindset is very much about like learning by experience, learning by doing. And I think that's what also enables us to like be open to come up with new solutions all the time. So like we have that going for it and for us, and I know it's not necessarily common, but like pointing to an example like that in another company might also work for
yeah.
some organizations. And then what you said is like you either create the new thing or if you don't like that you have to choose whether you're developing a new thing or like sustaining the old thing, and I can't see that being possible. Like
Mm,
I mean, at least in my experience. So I what we did is like when we were like faced with this planning issue on our like leadership offsites is like we 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 kept thinking in how can I say it? We kept rediscovering like every quarter that we didn't get as far as we wanted to with progress of the new solution because so many issues were coming up with like support of the old ones that you couldn't really foresee, right? So the thing that we decided to do is we knew the priorities of the company and we knew our headcount and we decided to sort of restructure the domain, the department, let's say, in a way that we would have the sustainers and the developers of the new solution assigned. So the teammate wouldn't have to juggle supporting an existing
mm,
solution with figuring out a new way. And one thing that was super important to us once we sort of knew that we had things to create, things to sustain, and things
mm,
to the commission was making sure that everyone is equally appreciated. That like the people, not only the people who were developing the new solution were championed, but the ones who were the commissioning systems that we didn't want no longer have were championed even more, like for to like getting rid of the burden that was slowing us down, and like the
right.
core of people who were sustaining the existing solution, the live solution, were also championed, that they were the ones that were like sort of enabling us to move forward
Right.
because without them it would be a full stop.
Right. So, but that's fantastic from both, financial buy-ins and psychological buy-ins. But you know, whenever you're driving a transformation, especially digital transformation, there are two types of changes that happen. One is a technology change, the other is a methodology change. And
Mm.
people are accustomed to the old technologies or the technologies that they are used to working, that has made, let's say, their last decade of career, and the methodology, which is a force of habit now, to the way they think, the way they do things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so how do you tackle a resistance from people? Of course, there's a buy-in of the future
Mm-hmm.
things, but I think resistance is also because of fear. For example, it happened in industrial revolution. Now it's happening. I don't think it's happening with the new developers, but there's a fear of what could happen, maybe in governments and like everywhere you try to change something. There are two things, right? So one is resistance because of being accustomed to the technology methodology. The second is psychological safety, right? So how do you drive that when you're driving digital transformation?
I think the force of habit is for sure extremely strong, and people after a while don't notice the hardships that the old technology brings them, because it's like a stone in a shoe that you kind
Yeah,
of get used to. But one of the things that we would do is we would ask them to onboard newcomers and be faced with all those questions. Why is it like that? Like why? But why like that? Like why is it taking so long?
yeah,
So they would be able to really sort of step out of their habit and look at it with fresh eyes and try to explain it, not
yeah,
in terms of like historical reasons, but in terms of like why does it work right now. And I think it's a good way to like be more aware of the ways of working.
yeah,
um, and the second thing that we were also doing is sort of like with the double diamond, like people are very attached to a specific technology. Yeah, that's true. Like there are people who are actual fans and advocates of a specific technology, but you can also zoom it out a little, or like in terms of the double diamond, like
right,
move to the first diamond and say like you're an expert of this problem space. Like, for example, how, I don't know, repositories work, like how
yeah,
CI/CD works, because you've spent so many years. You must have a backlog of ideas how to improve it. Like help us define a really good problem so we can solve it with a newer technology. Like we can't move without you, because nobody has gained so much time after time, like repeated
yeah.
experiences and ways of potentially improving it. So yeah, like incorporating people like that in a process as experts makes them feel seen, heard, and I think like also helps them see where the solution is going. So that makes it familiar, right? Like it makes them part of the story of the new solution as well.
Fantastic. So once you start a transformation, how do you make sure that things are on track? I mean, we have so many things acting against us. We are driving, we are flying against the wind. So
Mm.
how do you make sure that things are on track? Do you use data for that? Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, how do you do it?
I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that one, because like what Klarna is very good at is like changing the map and laying
Mm,
the tracks wherever they need to go, and like facing the hills that are in front of us. So all the things I used to have in my back pocket, which is like coming back to the brief, or like showing the roadmap, and like making sure that we're on track, they don't really work in here. Like
yeah,
this is the approach here, that like you adjust as you go, and nothing is set in stone.
yeah,
You just need to make sure we are all aligned. So like if we're if we're rephrasing the goal, let's get a sign off together that
yeah,
the objective has moved, and like let's have a naysayer in that room as well. Like the what about X, Y, and Z? Like
yeah.
do we have a sign off of that no longer being a priority? Do we put it on a backlog? Is it completely irrelevant and nobody will like circle back to it in 3 months or six?
And what about like once the scope is set in stone,
Mhm.
and even if there are a little bit flexibilities, how do you make sure that the operational execution is on track? Because I mean everything's new, the
Mm.
visibility is poor, and people do not understand where the bottlenecks become. And
Hmm.
you know they are always operating on a lag. They are always on the lagger side, because when
Mhm.
they take buy-in, let's say a couple of $1 million to change a certain way. You get the buy-ins for full-time employees. Everything's set, right? But every budget comes basis timeline for those employees, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now it becomes essentially it becomes very essential to be
Mm-hmm.
on time, because otherwise the budget goes off. So
Mm-hmm.
have you like faced any instances where you got everything right? So you spotted an area, got the buy-in, have a team working on it, but now mid project there you discover that, oh, 50% of our budget is gone, but our project is just, let's say, 20%.
I would say like what I've experienced when we see this discrepancy between planning and delivery is we have domain architects, like very mature engineers who are able. They are our like SWAT team. They
Yeah.
basically land in a problem space and try to help figure out the team, like what's making them stuck,
Hmm.
and are they doing actually the work that we agreed on doing. Maybe they are like
Got
somehow circling
Yeah.
back to the
So
old.
they are
uh,
able to take care of that.
yeah, and then one other thing that I thought of when you were describing the sort of the risk or the problem is that I like, if you think about school, you have one first graders, second graders, and so on. There's always gonna be a wave of first graders, right? So there's always gonna be newcomers to the problem space because of talent acquisition and like people circling in the industry, or because they shifted a team, or for whatever reason. So you have to make sure you have this like first grade material handy always,
Yeah.
so you don't lose time on onboarding, like because people are
Hmm.
they they are guessing, they are thinking that they
Yeah.
are supposed to know something and not asking direct questions. Like, don't assume that everybody is on the same page that you are. Like, make an
Fair.
solidified effort to like reintroduce basic concept we all agreed on, weekly, monthly, whatever is fits your schedule as an organization. But like, don't underestimate the value of basics and like setting those
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything's based on a very strong foundation, right? And
mm,
foundations are simple things set really in stone. And I think that's
mm,
spot on, that you need to make sure that everyone realizes that these are the foundational stones for our entire motion, right? And not anything else. So let's say once the thing, is rolled out, uh, there's still another period where
mm.
it's still new, right? How do you ensure that once you move out of the system, when
Mhm.
once you have transformed it, how do you ensure that it doesn't break again?
Oh, it's gonna break, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's part of tech. One of the things that's like me as a designer does is
Yeah.
like we also design instructions around it and make tutorials, and we want to make sure that any information that helps you work with the new
Yeah.
system as its customer is handy to you. And this big hurrah of the launch is not lost on the people who come to this technology further down the line.
Right.
And you have to have maintenance hours on any
Hmm.
product you have. Like, you can't just wish it to happiness. Like, it's not gonna operate on its own. You have to have assigned resources who will make sure that this is a viable and
Yeah.
constantly uh, sought to solution.
Let me ask this question differently.
Mm,
Now there's another, wave of change coming in, and a lot of organizations who had, made their technology based on Web 2.0, where there's server client architecture. You send a request, something
mhm,
happens, there's API, and all of that is built. But now agentic motion comes in. A
mhm,
lot of projects have a different expectation for UX, right? So now
mhm,
a consumer, or even us, when we are using any tech product, we are expecting much more. We are expecting way more. We are from this, like, the tool that we're using, we are expecting that it will transcribe for us, it'll
Mm-hmm.
generate an AI summary, right? So the customer expectations from a product are increasing, which
Mm-hmm.
means that again we are going to gather a lot of backlog for the organization or for any enterprise to transform later, right? So how do you prevent, with this fast pace of technology, how do you make sure that you can't, even if you can't prevent the system from breaking, how do you make sure that the next time the organization is more proactive when any such change is coming up? How do you
Mm-hmm.
make your organization
Mm-hmm.
change? I don't know. Change proof is not the right word. Uh, Ready for change.
Ready for change. I think like in agile processes and not waterfall ones, you can't really live in this reality of like one big launch that lasts you for a long, long time,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to constantly adapt to the customer feedback and to the benchmarks that are around that. So you need to make that part of your planning for the product. So I would say like we already do it here in Klarna. Like we have customer satisfaction surveys and we are tracking the usability and capabilities of the product, and that's where like UX metrics came super handy because we have the same sort of questionnaire for all of the products. We're able to see like where the whole portfolio is, and yeah, like I am a strong advocate for that. And also all the PMs make it their priority to talk to customers and like understand, is this solution actually solving the problem that might have been changing since the conception of the technology. But I think what I'm describing right now is it feels like a common knowledge. So let me know if it's like if this is solving the issue that you were trying to address in this
No, that's
question.
okay. That's totally okay. Uh, any tips for the HCIs or the HCI designers in the
Mm-hmm.
organizations when they're dealing with AI? What concerns do you see today
Mm-hmm.
with what technology or what advancement of AI we have? Right, so it's quite powerful, but do you see any concerns while implementing that?
I mean, I think all of us in tech space have experienced how it hallucinates,
Yeah,
how it can be both a collaborator, but a little bit of a distractor,
yeah,
or it can bring some hustle into your daily life, and that's valuable. I think that's the learning curve of using that is one thing, but the other thing that I'm passionate about is the biases written into AI because of who's developing it.
correct.
And like me as a female in a tech space, like I carry that flag of like, are you really looking to have diverse teams?
Yeah,
Are you including different competencies other than computer science? Because
yeah.
what AI brings and what it's really revolutionary in my mind in is that it stopped working in this like library structure, and it started working in this neural network
Hmm.
way, right? So like think about like how books are stacked in a library versus at your home. It's not going to be the same logic. And then like we finally have this like human logic scaled to a exponential degree. This is when you should bring in people who are linguistic scientists, social scientists,
Hmm.
psychological scientists, because they've been working with how people think
Hmm.
and how they verbalize their needs for years. And there's like a wealth of knowledge and best practices, and we really don't need to reinvent that wheel by trial and error with AI.
Right.
And I haven't seen it happen at scale yet. I think it's still a tech toy to a degree. Like the solutions that are built on top of the released models are driven by mostly by engineers,
Hmm.
and it's understandable. But I think it's also short-sighted right now, because what we're replicating a mental model of one specific people with one specific background,
Hmm.
and degree is taking it, and like AI is taking to like it to like exponential degree, right? So it's gonna have a mental model written into it that represents Northwestern views, male way of thinking, people who have very consequential and well-built
Yeah.
career, and so on. Like a lot of a lot of patterns that we are not aware of
Hmm.
it gets replicated within it.
Wonderful point. Wonderful point. And if someone, so I'll cut again here. But
Mhm.
so, what should I shout out for? Are you hiring? Do you want people to follow your work? What should I give you a shout out for?
Yeah, I think my LinkedIn, because that's where I publish
Yeah.
if I have new foundings, and if there's anything we mentioned in the previous talk that we didn't touch on right now and you were excited about, let me know so we can maybe circle back to something.
Yeah, definitely. So let me
Hmm.
say it right. So we'll start rolling from this point. As for my editor notes. So Kasha, this was a lovely episode, and I wish I could just keep asking more and more curiosity questions, because this is such a different perspective. And as you mentioned about AI, right? So
Hmm.
in this field we are so used to a certain flavor of perspective that
Hmm.
it almost feels like that's the only way. But when you bring in your fresh wave of thoughts, I truly think that we do need diversity in the change implementers, in the way people are making designs. So I would highly encourage all our listeners to follow Kasha on LinkedIn and see her work. Maybe ask her questions there, or
Go
in the comments here, so that we can gather her for another episode,
ahead.
for sharing more insights on driving change. So thank you, Kasha, for giving us time on the change story.
Thank you. It was a lovely conversation, and I'm looking forward to any other ones that might happen based on that
Of
input.
course, of course. Thank you.